Cool. Thank you, Maggie, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be interviewing Hannah, Quinlan and Rosie Hastings for the Jarman Award today. I've been friends with Hannah and Rosie for the last 6 years, in which we have also shared a studio. This closeness has given me an intimate insight into their film practice. As a filmmaker myself, we have shared our highs and low moments and supported one another as our practice develops. For me, Hannah and Rosie's practice feels like a place of safety in which the legacy of queer bodies can exist. Their work speaks of underrepresented stories within the hierarchy of public and private space. I'm inspired by their determination and political motivation to decode social behaviours within the LGBTQ+ context. I particularly enjoy how Hannah and Rosie's films situate the daily realities of LGBTQ+ people within the broader societal and political context. On a personal level, I feel like I have 2 friends, 2 colleagues, and 2 mums. I have witnessed the hard work and many hours that Hannah and Rosie put into producing a new film, and met many of their collaborators who I now call my friends and also work with. So welcome, Hannah and Rosie.
Thanks, Gabby. That made me well up a bit. That's nice. Cool. Thanks, Maggie, as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Introduction.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to speak for around 50 minutes and then there'll be a Q&A at the end. So I thought I'd start with my first question is, I wanted to ask about film funding, which is often the first step of any new film project. How do you conceptualize your ideas through funding? And could you tell us more about this process?
Yeah. Well, just to start with, this is Hannah and I'm Rosie, just in case anyone gets confused. So yeah, we've applied for film funding 3 times now. The first time was in 2016, and the first film application we wrote was such a struggle. It took us 6 weeks to write, and I think what was difficult was kind of learning to I feel like when you apply for funding, you have to learn to institutionalize your ideas, and you have to think about, you have to think about your work from almost like an audience perspective. And I think that's incredibly useful in terms of consolidating your ideas. And also in terms of like the huge practical administrative undertaking that is producing a film, writing a funding app is almost like creating a map in which to like navigate all that kind of nightmare of budget and resources and crew. So yeah, I feel like funding is a necessary evil in the sense that it's a way of processing your project. And as the years have gone on, we've become more confident at funding, and now it's it feels like just part of the process, doesn't it?
I think becoming proficient at funding applications, sadly, it does mean that your scope of filmmaking becomes so much larger, and you're able to be super ambitious in your outlook, which you couldn't necessarily do without any funding. So it is a difficult but a very important step in wanting to work with a larger team, wanting to work with a cinematographer or a choreographer, or even just working with performers and being able to pay everyone who takes part properly. It is an important step. Yeah.
And I have to say that from the first time we applied for funding, our network of fellow artists who kind of stepped in and provided support and help and guidance was so important. And now I feel like it's really important to sort of reproduce that. So we try and be there for like our friends or peers who are in similar situations. And I think that having that sort of solidarity with each other, trying to navigate this crazy and sometimes highly competitive world of funding is really important.
Yeah, it literally is a language. I feel like you two also taught me a little bit on how to apply funding. So it's literally a whole skill set.
On the flame, the administrative flame.
Literally. So that leads me to my second question, which is, since you began collaborating in 2014, your films have taken many forms, from CGI, found footage assemblages, and moving image archives to highly cinematic works. Could you talk about this journey through mediums and tell us how you decide which film processes to work with and why?
Yeah, it has. I think it's maybe important to say that we are, as a duo, we're very multidisciplinary, not just in the film work, but we're also we draw, we paint, we make installations, and I think we approach filmmaking in a similar way. We're not only interested in one form of filmmaking, and I think our entry into filmmaking was during our at Gay Bar project together, which is where we would build fully functional gay bars, and often within these bars we would house found footage films, where often we would gather the information online and then we would also record stuff offline, and it was a very playful way of us to kind of montage imagery together. And I think from that we've definitely ended up going into very different forms of filmmaking as well, so kind of working in a more archival way for the UK Gay Bar directory, and from that
using CGI. Yeah. So some of our early films we use CGI, and I think when we first started working together in this quite experimental and playful way at Gay Bar, which was an event series that lasted from 2014 to 2016, and it really was the first thing that we did. It was almost like we were learning about making films. We were learning about the different possibilities. So I think we had a real tendency to want to work, and we were filming on our mobiles, we were filming a GoPro, we were filming on a really expensive camera, then we were using found footage, and we were working in CGI. And I think CGI was a very formative technique for us, because there's something, so CGI, computer generated imagery, something was so amazing about being able to create your own world from scratch. And I think our earliest film was called Becoming Natural, and it showed these various kind of desolate post-apocalyptic landscapes, like an empty beach or a mountainside, kind of quite sublime scenes, and then we'd import objects from protests into them. And I think
just loads of different types of
loads of different things.
But we'll go on to talk more in depth about these different projects. But I think, for example, when we were filming in the Gay Bar directory, often a lot of gay bars do feature TV monitors, and you kind of have this sense of there's constantly moving image being played in the background of these venues, whether it's kind of like mass TV walls showing music videos, or in bars where they constantly have the news playing, or they have like a documentary about like a murderer playing in these venues. So you have this constant strange contrast between, say, the BBC News playing in the back of a nightclub and what's going on in the club and how it informs that space. So I think we've always been interested in these different ways film can exist.
That kind of leads me to my next question, which is about the UK Gay Bar Directory. So you've often spoken about the UK Gay Bar Directory as a foundational work in your practice, something that you draw inspiration from for many of your subsequent shows. Could you tell us more about the work and your experience of creating it?
So the UK Gay Bar Directory is a moving image archive of gay bars in the UK that we started filming in 2015, and we were on the road for almost a year. We travelled around 14 different cities, and we filmed over 100 venues using a GoPro camera, which is like a tiny little handheld thing. And we sort of decided to make this archive in response to the rapid closure of LGBTQ venues in London, but also across the UK. So there was a real urgency to the project. There was a feeling that we kind of had to get out there and go to as many places as possible, because every time we'd arrive somewhere, it'd be that a venue was just about to close or had just closed. So, and it felt like there was nothing that existed. There was no sort of documentation of this culture that existed, and it felt as if it was, going through this period of loss without any representation. So it felt we were like really motivated, and at the same time it was the beginning of Brexit, and there was a shift to the political right. There was like a really large increase in homophobic hate crimes. There was also a survey that came out that showed that there were more men living with HIV in the UK than ever before, which felt really extreme. But at the same time, the NHS removed PrEP, which is a preventative drug for HIV, from its services, and this provoked a huge grassroots gay activist movement, which took place mostly in gay bars. The UK government also tried to ban poppers. There was so much going on, and it felt, you know, every town that we went to had like its own set of complicated issues. And I think we were really pursuing this question, you know, why are venues closing? What is the future of LGBTQ culture in the UK? And I think what we found was that it was, you know, this and a conservative policy of austerity, a general decline in living standards, and also the gentrification of urban space had led to these closures. And so it kind of opened up this whole world of research for us. And I think since we filmed the Gay Bar Directory, we've returned to two of the places that we first visited, so Birmingham and Blackpool, to make films which have a higher kind of production value. And I think there's something about, you know, we were in a rush the first time we did it, racing through these venues, not spending that much time in each place. And I think we've got this, as you said, it's a foundational work, something that we return to time and time again. It kind of laid the scene for so much of our work, both visually and conceptually. But also, I think the experience of making the archive, that also laid the ground for a lot of our, I don't know, the themes that became more recurrent in our work. For instance, we never anticipated the difficulty that we would have in archiving these venues, because so many of them are male dominated or men's only. And it just became this ridiculous, almost like quite farcical situation where we'd be going, you know, to places and knocking on doors and asking to be let in and being told no way, or yeah, you can come at 10 a.m. when the cleaning's in, and this sort of weird hierarchy within LGBTQ culture where we were trying to, you know, archive these spaces, but being very kind of rejected or ostracized from them at the same time. And I think, you know, that led us to this, to sort of view gay bars in a more sort of critical, from a more critical perspective.
Yeah, it was an interesting time as well, because it was also a time in which there was a lot of debate going on about kind of what is the relevancy of gay bars in today's culture. And a lot of people were gunning for this argument, which is that due to social media and dating apps, maybe these spaces aren't necessary anymore. And I think personally, we found this narrative, there was almost an element of self-hatred in this narrative. It was almost as in, like, we don't need these spaces anymore. And it was a way of kind of blaming the issues these venues were facing on the community itself, rather than looking at external factors. So what we often found as well is that a lot of the gay bars were almost ashamed or slightly anxious to identify as gay bars, and they were or nightclubs that were focused on a student clientele. So you kind of got to know all these different issues that were happening in the way in which they were internalizing the problems they were facing. And there was also kind of these visual and aesthetic repetitions that happen throughout the archive, because it's kind of like a 5-hour-long film in which you start to notice these similarities in like the design of the bars and like the lighting and the colors used. And also what we found interesting is that gay bars and nightclubs, even though they're commercial spaces, they also played this unique role in the community of offering information about sexual health and kind of activist leaflets. And there was always this sense of, on the one hand, they're selling incredibly cheap drinks, and then on the other hand, they're also advertising kind of AA, Alcohol Anonymous meetings, and kind of providing information for like people with addiction problems. So there's lots of interesting things that were happening visually within these spaces.
Yeah, and I think what that made, because, you know, at this time of austerity, when public infrastructure was being dismantled, libraries, community centres, public services, hostels for homeless people were, you know, sort of also disappearing along with gay bars. And it felt like gay bars were actually stepping in and providing a space for you know, for instance, like I'll never forget going to Blackpool and there was a gay bar that opened at 9 a.m. and sold pints for £1. And when I spoke to the owner about it, he just said, well, where else are all the homeless people going to go? There's nothing for them to do. Like, I want to offer them somewhere they can come to and feel safe. And then at 7 p.m. I kick them out. It turns into a gay bar, and we increase the price of the drinks like by 3 times. And I thought that was, I don't know. And I think in terms of how we thought about public space, you know, it sort of became, it made it, you know, it wasn't just about gay bars in the end. It was about the whole of the public, and it was about, you know, the whole of, you know, what resources were available.
And linking these different problems that were affecting different parts of the UK. And it was really nice to be able to travel that much. And
cool. So that leads me to my next question. So in 2018, you interviewed me about my first relationship, which was with a policeman for the film Gabby, which you named after me. I love the way you wove my personal narrative into a broader exploration of the LGBT community's relationship with the police. Could you tell us more about this work, please?
So the film Gabby, we made it for an exhibition in New York at a gallery called Queer Thoughts, and we showed it alongside a series of drawings. And we'd been researching the gentrification of the gay village in New York, so sort of Christopher Street and the piers. And we were really interested in this relationship that formed between affluent, white, gay and lesbian business owners in the gay village and the police. And initially, this strange this uncomfortable alliance was made to sort of cleanse the streets of undesirables. And it started off as this thing of trying to make the streets safer for gay people, so less homophobic, and trying to handle the amount of attacks in the gay village. But what it led to was a sort of cleansing the gay village of like undesirables. So that's, you know, street workers, sex workers, drug users and dealers, homeless people, the people who were using the piers as a sort of unofficial kind of gay bar / voguing, you know, dance spot. And so essentially the policing models that came out of this were actually really homophobic. So it's kind of had this strange, uncomfortable kind of contradiction that really exposed the hierarchy that exists within the LGBTQ community. But it also led to the creation of some new models of policing, which are now dominant models. And the other consequence of this is that it's led to like the mass incarceration that has, you know, turned into like one of the biggest prison populations of all time, that disproportionately affects non-white people and people from working class backgrounds. So for instance, it's called like lifestyle policing or broken windows policing. And it's the idea that if you're in a neighborhood and you see a broken window, you're more likely to go on to commit a larger crime. So you go to the policeman will go to the root of the crime and persecute the person with the broken window with a really harsh, really harsh sentencing, and sort of it's called, you know, zero tolerance policing. And so what you see is this process of intensified policing and then intensified gentrification starting in the gay village in New York and then spreading out across the whole of America to all American cities, and then across, you know, to Europe and the UK. And it's a sort of process of gentrification that's been mirrored time and time again. And so in the film Gabby, maybe you could talk about what the film shows.
Yeah, so the film begins with a collection of found footage, which is police dancing at pride events kind of across the world, mostly in America and the UK and in Europe. And at the time we made the film, there was also this big debate going on in the queer community about the inclusion of the police and military personnel at pride marches. So there was obviously this, due to the history that people are aware of, there's this real pushback, and people didn't want these personnel to be included in the marches. So there was a lot of protests against this happening. And kind of the film shows this quite almost uncomfortable footage in which the police are kind of celebrating these moments, and they're being like very performatively gay, and they're
trying to do like sexy dancing.
Yeah, and there's actually a moment in the Gay Pride parade in London where a UK police officer proposes to his husband in the crowd, and kind of this ridiculously camp moment in which there's confetti falling down, and then it kind of just felt like it was completely going against the history of the relationship with the police and the LGBTQ community. So like, I don't know, the past criminalization of sex acts between men, kind of what happened during the 1980s with HIV and AIDS, and kind of a history of Section 28, and all these crazy moments of obviously the police not doing anything in aid of the gay community, and then you have what's seen now as progression is their complete inclusion in these marches. So it was this uncomfortable intimacy, and I think we used the song YMCA, which kind of encapsulates this with the characters it chooses to represent in the music video. So you have the police officer and the army officer, and it kind of speaks of this. On the one hand, again, in gay erotica, you have this link between authority figures and the community, and kind of in the work of Tom of Finland, for example, you have this almost romantic exploration of the idea of the American police officer, and kind of all of his intimate encounters in the drawings are with the people who he is arresting. So it's kind of this real contradiction that's going on.
Yeah.
And then we also have this macro footage, this very zoomed in footage of this issue of Christopher Street magazine that was called Can Gays Save New York City? And it kind of, again, reads as this farce in which affluent white gay men and lesbians can save New York from dilapidation and crime and drug use. And it chimes really uncomfortably with this tough on crime thing that was going on in America, which led to the fallout which you see today. And it has, in the magazine, it has this series of, I think it's like 6 illustrations that were commissioned by the magazine to explore what would be New York City run by gay people. And you have these kind of ridiculous illustrations of like sci-fi gay utopia, where it's kind of gay couples living in like saucer-shaped skyscrapers, like
drinking
sipping
cocktails,
martinis, and it feels exactly like what New York did not need at the time.
Yeah. And then it finishes with your story as this kind of quite kitsch kind of, I don't know, subtitles.
Yeah, so Gabby's story plays out in subtitles that are interspersed with a CGI scene that explores one of the scenes in Gabby's story. I don't know, maybe Gabby would want to tell his story. I
mean, I can say a bit about it if you want. Basically, Rosie and Hannah had approached me saying that they were doing all this investigation work into the police, and they wanted to make some work about the kind of, these kind of two policing structures and kind of pride structures and the kind of jarring qualities. And then I basically had told Rosie that I was in a relationship with a police officer when I think it was 19 years old. And it didn't last long. It only lasted about a month and a half. But I guess it was one of my first relationships whilst I was still at college, and he lived on the Haygate estate in Elephant and Castle at the time. And during this course of this relationship, I realised that he just was incredibly just conservative, misogynist. I had a lot of homophobic issues, and then it just kind of obviously naturally ended. But and as well, like, it was just a very short-lived relationship. But I think it was just that thing when you're younger and you kind of hit the gay scene, and I was quote unquote a twink, just kind of like looking to realize his fantasy as mine as a very immature fantasy, and that's kind of how the relationship kind of manifests itself in a way.
The story of you going to like a gay bar with the police and all his police gay friends, and like you and all the girlfriends and boyfriends were all together in a corner, like being really like powerless and like drinking your cocktails, and then all the police were being really volatile and drunk and getting in fights with people and causing conflicts. And
yeah, literally we went on it was basically an LGBT police night out, which he had brought me on. And then basically we had all gone to Soho, I guess, and I guess we were all just sitting on each other's laps and stuff, and they were being quite like, I don't know, some of them would just, as they got drunk, were getting a bit rowdy, and it was this crazy juxtaposition as well of just a police officer trying to start a fight in non-uniform, and it was just kind of very odd. Like,
it's the same thing of like that discomfort that I think runs throughout the film. But what I liked about bringing your story in is that it kind of brings in this kind of intimate messiness, and I think quite often that's what we try and do in our films. Like, we do all our research and we know what our message is, but at the same time we try and complicate it. And I think there's something really complicated about your relationship, the policeman, that expressed that really nicely. So it was such a good thing to bring into the film.
Yeah, literally. Every time I'm feeling a bit nostalgic on a rainy day, just load up the film. I'm joking.
Put your dirty laundry out for everyone to see.
Literally.
Thank you for giving us your story. Because we really love that. And also in terms of our journey of filmmaking, as you were saying before, what I love about that film is that it's got found footage, it's got CGI, it's got filmed footage. It's kind of got everything that we do. So that was, and it was also like a zero budget film. So I don't know, it was kind of nice putting that together.
Yeah, it kind of encompasses like all your ways of thinking, all your processes and stuff like that. Which kind of leads me to my next question, as we close that chapter forever.
Lock it up.
Literally lock it up, throw away the key. Didn't happen. Basically, your work is highly collaborative. Often you work with recurring collaborators in your film and performance works. Collaborators include singer-songwriter Jesse Holtberg, dancer Ted Rogers, and more recently, choreographer Les Child. Could you tell us a bit more about these collaborations and more broadly about the integral function that collaboration plays in your wider practice?
So I think, from when obviously we collaborate with each other, and then on top of that, since the beginning of our practice, we've really had an interest in working with large groups of people. And I think film as a medium, you naturally do that anyway, like kind of you're working with, like a director of photography, you would work with a choreographer and performers. So it really naturally lends itself for working in these big teams. And I think for us, it became a really exciting way of working with dance, and really with people who already have kind of their own set of interests in performance. So they are definitely performers. It's not documentary, it's not anthropology. We're kind of using people, actors and performers who are used to kind of taking on different characterizations and roles. And I think for us, that felt like a natural extension of work we had done in our At Gay Bar project together, where we would build these gay bar venues and we would use them as a means to invite people to do readings and performances and kind of allow them to be in control of their own representation within the venue. So to take maybe, which film should we talk about specifically? So in Something for the Boys, which is it's a film set in Blackpool, and we made it in 2017. And again, when filming the UK Gay Bar Directory, we'd become really fascinated with these two different venues in Blackpool, one of which was called Man Bar, and it had a sex club above it called Growler Club. And then right next door to it was this huge, fantastical Art Deco old cinema called Funny Girls, which has, I think it's 6 nights a week, full 2-hour-long performance.
Cabaret performance.
Yeah, so a really amazing production with really amazing dancers and singers that's on every single night. And they always have kind of like a headline act, which is normally a drag performer. And then they also have a drag performer who hosts the whole evening. So on the one hand, you had this venue called Man Bar and it had a leather club upstairs. So it was this ultra masculine bar. And even the name of it for us, we found quite hilarious, because when filming the directory, obviously we were coming up against these male-only venues, and we kind of loved the fact that this venue was just called Sansour. And right next door you had this ultra feminine venue that was very much part of Blackpool's entertainment history, but kind of like the gay version of it. So you had, I wouldn't even say that the clientele was specifically LGBTQ, it was very much an entertainment venue. And we really liked the dynamic between these two very different types of performances that were happening. So we worked with Ted Rogers, who danced in Man Bar and Growler Club, and for us it was amazing working with Ted because he had a musical theatre background and had trained in musical theatre, and then he'd also spent time as a go-go dancer in queer clubs, and he had also had this very personal relationship to queer culture, and he had kind of rejected this ultra masculine figure. So working with him as this character who we saw as a go-go dancer with musical theatre aspirations, which is what we said his character was, felt really a really nice way of collaborating with him on that role.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about collaborating, and this is something that we have really taken from our at Gay Bar days, is that it's quite community building, and it's a really nice way of kind of socializing your practice like into the queer community. Like pretty much everyone we collaborate with is like a close friend or queer, like, and you kind of, it feels like we've been on this, because we collaborate with people over a period of time, often more than once, it feels like you're on this kind of journey together, and you're building your skill set together, and it is almost this superpower where you're working with everyone's kind of what everyone's really good at and everyone's specialism to make this bigger vision happen. And I think there's something just incredibly gratifying about that. And it feels like we have to mention Rosie Taylor, director of photography, who Gabby's also worked with on his new film Truth and Kinship. But we've known Rosie since we studied our BA together at Goldsmiths, and she's just she's like such a fighter. And yeah, I just think, I don't know, working with her in every film we've ever made, it's like we formed this almost like familiar kind of relationship. So I couldn't really imagine. Yeah, it feels like such an integral part of the works. And so yeah, I think collaboration is super important. And and then I think what's nice about being multidisciplinary artists is that we get to work in this big kind of gay family that we've made, and we're working, sharing everything all together. And then me and Hannah get really exhausted, and then we kind of retreat and we disappear into our bedroom, and then we'll just work on a drawing for like 6 months. And it's almost like you need that space to recharge your batteries. So I think we've got that nice dynamic in our life, basically.
And what's it like directing and producing films as a duo, basically? Do you take on specific roles, or how does it work exactly?
Just every role.
Yeah,
we haven't yet worked with a producer before on a film, so you're in charge of every single practical element, from accommodation, food, transport, venues, casting, like everything. And I think it is really vital to our process that there is two of us. And at some points, I don't really know how artists and filmmakers do it alone, because it can be an incredibly alienating process, because often you're working with a gallery which has a whole team at its disposal, and as artists, unless you have an assistant, you can often feel like you're in it alone slightly, and the workload can feel quite immense. So I think working together for us has allowed us to be very ambitious in learning new mediums and not being afraid of straying from what we're used to. So I think we feel very comfortable in taking on what feels like quite mammoth tasks together. And I think I found in all of our mediums it works. It's quite a natural way of working together, and even we obviously draw together, which some people can't get their head around, and we paint together. And I think historically these mediums have always been done collaboratively, and I think yeah, it works basically.
Yeah. I think when we first started, when you go through art school, I feel like there's such an onus on your it's almost like you go to art school and you get taught to sort of ferment your artist ego, and it feels like that's the most important part of your practice, like finding out who you are as an artist. And I think when we started working together, we used to have these crazy fights because we were so anxious that we weren't both going to be represented in the work, or we had this idea and we felt like it had to be like the dominant idea, and maybe we'd work a bit more, you do this, I'll do this. But as the years have gone on, I feel like we have really merged, and it's quite good because I think it's like all the areas that we're kind of scared of or we feel unconfident in, we force each other to sort of overcome those fears. And and as Hannah said, I feel like it allows us to be more ambitious and to kind of like accelerate our process of learning and creating things.
Yeah, literally, you support each other so much. I see it in the studio and stuff.
You've seen the crying, the fighting, the makeup. You've witnessed it all.
No, but you're a good team. Literally, you power through everything, and I actually do want to highlight the phrase you used, mammoth tasks, because sometimes you do things, for example, like the fresco stuff, and I'm just like, damn, like just quite so that leads me to my next question, which is about dance. So dance plays an integral role in how you construct narrative and momentum in your recent films, Something for the Boys and In My Room. How did you start working with like the medium of dance in your films?
So again, it's kind of this origin back to at Gay Bar performances, where we were essentially putting on these club nights, and then people would come, and the activation of these installations as we saw them was always people having fun and dancing together. And again, we were always showing on the video screens this found footage of people dancing and learning dance routines together. And then there was a relationship to the way dance was kind of part of public pageantry, so the way it was used in pride parades and protest, and the pageantry of the military and the police, and the way there was a certain performance and theatricality to these people. And I think it came quite naturally from that.
And also just thinking about queer culture and queer history, and how, you know, queer culture and queer life are so heavily censored and criminalized, that dance, and I think this is a case of like a lot of minority cultures, that dance became a way of having a voice and of communicating and kind of having a narrative. And I think that takes place, you know, not just in like highbrow culture, you know, not just in you know, the silver screen and the in cinema and on the stage, but also in nightclubs. And it's a way of that community, that, you know, queer community has formed, and it's a type of identity. I think there's like an identity forming that goes on in gay clubs when people dance together, and it's a sort of queer world making, and so it feels like a really appropriate tool to use, I think, to express like these complicated ideas that we look at in our film work.
So just gonna check if we have any questions, as we have only 10 minutes left of the talk.
That went so quick.
I know.
We haven't even spoken about In My Room yet.
Let me just check. So there is one question, and it's, do you see your moving image work going more and more into high production value live action, or are you interested in looking at animation and found footage again?
Oh yeah, totally. I think like there's something really amazing moving between the different registers, and I think the high production is totally dependent on the found footage, and that is, I think we've been collating an archive of footage since we started working in film, stuff we filmed, stuff we found, and that's always growing. And I think that is our kind of mood board, and that's our inspiration. So I think being dynamic and being able to work on different budgets is really important.
I don't really see it as kind of, we did that because we had to do that, and now we do this because we have access to funding.
Yeah,
I think part of us actually really misses elements of making films like that, and it's definitely something that will weave in and out depending on what we're looking to explore in our film work.
Yeah, for example, like when we did a performance commission last year for Art Nights, which we showed again at the ICA this year. I think it was in the winter. And the performance was crazy. We built like a gay pride float, which had a Ted was dancing on. Mm-hmm. And then we worked with Owen, our music producer, to create an hour of music that looked at queer music history. So it went through all the different genres. Owen and Milo, who you work with as well, Gabby. Mm-hmm. And then on the screen, we had this hour-long film made from found footage and text. And the footage showed people dancing in their bedrooms, kind of these dances that felt quite radical, because they were so, you know, they were like hypersexual, they were very like gender divergent, and it felt, and seeing it in these domestic settings, or, you know, people all alone, felt pretty radical. And then contrasting that with these huge circuit parties, which is like 5,000 white gay guys with their tops off dancing in this like kind of as one body. And I don't know, so that was like I feel like being able to work in performance gives you freedom to maybe like work with found footage and to be more experimental again. So having those different registers in our practice feels really important. But saying that, we definitely are ambitious to make, you know, like a feature-length film, or just to keep pushing and to see how far we can develop our practice.
Yeah. So we got 9 minutes left. I could squeeze in one more of my questions, to be honest. I was kind of interested to know more about the locations of the film, just because I think that's quite an interesting element to go in. So In My Room is set in a variety of diverse locations: 2 gay venues, now sadly closed, in Birmingham's Gay Village, a military fort in Essex in a wooded area. How do you choose these locations, and how do their loaded histories contribute to constructing a narrative in your film?
So there was multiple kind of draw factors to why we ended up filming in Birmingham, and we had first filmed there in 2015 when filming a lot of the venues there for the Gay Bar Directory, and we'd been struck by the gay village there for kind of a number of reasons. One was that it was incredibly robust at the time of filming, and it seemingly was not being affected by a lot of the issues that were affecting other gay venues, and it had kind of a lot of venues that were very robust at the time. And we also had kind of unique experiences, especially in Barchester, when we had like this amazing long chat with the manager there, and we'd been really interested in visual elements of the venue. So in the film In My Room, you see kind of this repetitive figure of the etched jester, which is etched into the exterior of the venue. And Barchester was first opened in the 1970s, so it's this incredibly old gay venue. And it's gone through all these different iterations in which the exterior of the venue at times has been covered up and the jester has been painted, and then the most recent owner had removed the paint, and then so this kind of monument of the gay bar has gone through all these different iterations. And there's also a scene in the film of this reinterpretation of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and it's the scene where you see all these scantily clad, incredibly muscular gay men frolicking together up to heaven. And again, it felt like this quite kind of tongue-in-cheek representation of what we'd encountered in Birmingham, which was they had like a large amount of male-only venues and sex clubs and saunas that we weren't actually able to access and film. And then again, this narrative was further complicated by when we went to Birmingham. It became very apparent that the scene was becoming very affected by the development of HS2, which is the high-speed rail that connects London to Birmingham. And because of this, it had caused kind of like a splurge of new property developments in the area that were fought back against by local grassroots movement. But what it meant was that for kind of all basically the male-only venues, their leases were ending. And because the company Gooch Estates were suddenly able to invest in this luxury residential property, instead of keeping the existing leases of gay venues, they were either demolishing or handing the leases over to new owners. So it was this moment of crisis in which these venues, these old school male-only venues that we saw representative of this very certain mode of queerness, were suddenly being wiped out. So yeah, it was
interesting because the film In My Room explored like a public sex culture and tried to that men's only social spaces to a broader culture of like male domination in society. And so we are thinking, and so for instance, that's why we also shot in an old military fort in Essex, because we are thinking about this, the spectrum of male power that maybe starts in the sex club, but it goes all the way to like the military or the boardroom, and two kind of spaces that are also sort of dominated by these stereotypes of masculinity, and so yeah, I think that's why we chose to shoot in Birmingham.
And as you say, it is nice working with venues that have their own history, and almost just by featuring that venue, you access this whole history. And as you say, it's this almost these loaded objects and spaces and architectures. And also gay bars are so amazing to work with in film because they are so fantastical and beautiful, and the owners often put such an emphasis on the design and the lighting and the way in which people move through the spaces. So they naturally are really exciting to work with in film and with dance. And
yeah, and I guess as well, when you're making work about kind of public space and stuff, putting these kind of architectural kind of loaded kind of sites really kind of helps to make that film like richer, and to kind of have its own narrative and stuff, and to kind of really in-house the characters and stuff. So yeah, there's actually 4 minutes left. We did get one quick question, which I think will be the last one. And it says, you have made important work documenting the shrinking gay public realm. Do you know if your work has been used for championing and helping to support the scheme? Wait, I'm not sure about that question. One sec. You have, I don't know. I feel like we don't have enough time anyway. So I think I'm just going to end it here and say thank you so much for taking part in the talk. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabby, and thank you to the Jarman Award and the Whitechapel Gallery for hosting this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your sub day, like literally unwind from the talk and stuff. And yeah, cool. Thank you.